and welcome to the book chat. Today we are talking about A Wrinkle in Time by Madeline L'Engle, or I hope I said that right. Anyways, this book, man, it's a classic. But did you know that, as the title says, it was actually rejected about 5 times before it was finally accepted. And part of the reason why was people didn't really know what to make of it. They were like, "What is this book? It's middle grade children's young adult sci-fi fantasy philosophy. What is going on here? I have no idea." And so it actually took L'Engle quite a while before she got somebody who was willing to give her book a chance. But once the book was published, like many of these sleeper hit success stories, it actually did very well. And I think I read this book when I was 10 years old, 12, something like that. Something, elementary school. And I remember feeling very impressed by the book and also by myself because I was a young reader and I was like, I actually understand most of the stuff, except I don't know anything about fourth dimensions, fifth dimensions, tesseracts. Is that a thing? So I remember Googling that and trying to figure out if tesseracts really were a thing in real life. Turns out not exactly. But we do know there are such things as dimensions beyond, third and fourth dimension. Well, at least I think physicists say that there probably are dimensions beyond the third and fourth, but we'll see. Anyways, okay, so if you're not familiar with the story, let's talk about the background. So basically, the main character of the book is a girl named Meg Murray, and her father has been missing for quite a while. He's a scientist, both her parents are scientists, and he just disappeared one day. And so the story begins with her feeling like a misfit. She's in middle school, I think, 12 years old, maybe 14, 13, somewhere around there. Anyways, so she feels like a misfit. She has few friends because she's really smart, but she also has a bit of an attitude, so her teachers are not fond of her, and she doesn't really make friends with people. The only person that she's close to is her little 5-year-old brother named Charles Wallace, and he is a very precocious kid. He talks in full sentences even though he's 5, and he understands his mom and his sister on another level. And she also has some twin brothers who are couple years younger than her, I think, and they're very, quote, normal. So she always feels like an oddball. And then one day, on a dark and stormy night, literally, the book starts with something like, "It was a dark and stormy night." I think that was the exact first line, which I thought was funny. Anyways, so on a dark and stormy night, this strange woman comes into their house, and her name is Mrs. Whatsit. And then later, Charles Wallace he seems to know this woman and her two friends named Mrs. Witch, W-H-I-C-H, not W-I-T-C-H, and Mrs. Who. And so Mrs. Who, Mrs. Whatsit, and Mrs. Witch turn out to be these interdimensional, intergalactic space traveler type people who take Meg and Charles Wallace and then a new friend of theirs called Calvin, who's just this random boy from school who joins the party. One day, for some reason, he just has a feeling. So he goes to this abandoned house, I guess, and he meets the siblings. And the three of them get whipped away on this space adventure where the ultimate goal is to find and rescue Meg and Charles Wallace's father, who has been playing with interdimensional, intergalactic space travel and has gotten himself stuck on an evil planet. Literally, an evil planet. Like, the planet is overcome by evil. And the evil takes the form of this giant brain thing called It. I-T, It. Kind of like the clown in that Stephen King novel, which I haven't read because I think it would give me nightmares, but I've heard that there's a clown in the Stephen King novel called It, and it's creepy. So anyways, I wonder which one came first. I don't remember when Stephen King wrote his novel versus when Madeline L'Engle wrote her novel, but Stephen King's still alive, so maybe L'Engle did hers first? I don't know. Anyways, so there's this evil brain thing called It, and it has taken over this planet called Camazotz. And Camazotz, everybody's the same. Everybody acts the same. They all acting and behaving the same thing. Anyways, they're all kind of like in sync in this really weird, communistic, I guess, strange and awful way. And then, so a lot of things happen, and then Charles Wallace tries to fight back against it or defy it or something like that. It. By it, I mean like the capital I, capital T, evil brain thing on Camazotz. And he gets sucked in. And then Meg and Calvin and her father her father tries to save them and he manages to yank them through to some other random planet. Anyways, big long story short, this is all spoilers, by the way, because this whole review series, we're not about recommending books so that you read them yourself. We're analyzing books, so we're going to do all the spoiler things. So if you haven't read the book and you want to, just big warning here, spoiler coming. So the end of the story is Meg. Meg goes back to Camazotz to save her brother Charles Wallace, and the way that she saves him is because she realizes that what it doesn't have, this giant evil brain, it doesn't have love. It doesn't understand love. Whereas she does. She loves her brother, and she knows that her brother loves her. And so she goes back and she saves her brother by basically loving him, I guess, like saying, I love you, Charles. And then he kind of remembers himself, and then he comes back. And they all, finish their journey happily ever after in their vegetable garden. The three women, Mrs. What's-It, Mrs. Who, and Mrs. Which, transport them back to the garden, and yeah, that's the end of the story. So it's a interesting little adventure, and I remember the first time I read it, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a great book. I reread it a couple times since then, and then I recently kind of reviewed it again just to write this this article slash video, I guess. Anyways, so a few things that I found really interesting about the book. There are some themes and lessons in there that I think are really universal and apply no matter what age you are, or what stage you're in, or what generation you are in. But there are also some things that bothered me when I read it and still bother me today. And going back and rereading the book was an interesting experience because I didn't quite like it as much as I did when I was a little kid, because since then it's been over a decade, and I've read other books, and I've seen other writers create stories. And so with that context, with a lot more context, Wrinkle in Time is not quite the star that it once was. Although there are still, like I said, some really good shining moments in there. But the bothersome moments are still there. So let's just talk about it instead of me just giving these vague summarizations. So the first thing is, what was good about the book? So I liked how it was kind of, quote, daring, genre mashing. Like I said, the reason why it had such a hard time being published in the first place was because people weren't sure what to make of it. They were like, how do we categorize this? Who do we sell this to? Who would be interested in this story? We don't know, so we're not going to buy it. That's what a lot of publishers thought. But I like how Lee Engle just kind of went with her gut and wrote the story that she wanted to write, and then didn't really care that it was not fitting in the boxes at the time. And so she kind of broke a little bit of new ground. Also, I thought it was funny that she started with, "It was a dark and stormy night," because that's the stereotypical never start with this line, and she started with that line, and it worked. There's something about that scene. The story begins with Meg in her attic bedroom, and she and it's just a dark and stormy night, so there's a storm going on outside, and she's feeling kind of not happy, a little scared, and she goes down to the kitchen and she finds her little brother heating milk for hot chocolate or something, making sandwiches late at night. And then this is when Mrs. Witch comes in. That whole scene has a bit of a cozy feel to it. I love cozy feelings in books. Personally, one of my favorite experiences in life is to be in a very warm, cozy house. Personally, I like the feeling of being inside a warm, cozy house while it's raining cats and dogs outside. That's just me. I like rain when I'm inside the house, not in the rain. But other than that, I like rain. So I like that about the book. The second thing that I thought was brilliant about the book was Meg herself. She's a flawed character. She's slightly annoying. She's smart, but she doesn't really know it that well. At the same time, though, she gets very frustrated with people who are dumber than her. Like, that's one of the reasons why the teachers don't get along with her, is because she knows more than they do, and she doesn't understand why they're so dumb. And, that's one thing. Another thing, too, is before she's called back before she goes back to rescue Charles Wallace, she actually doesn't really want to, because she's afraid of it, the big brain thing. She doesn't like that thing. It nearly killed her at one point. And so she's like, I don't want to do it. Somebody else has to go. And then at the end, she kind of realizes that nobody else can go. She's the only one, because nobody else knows Charles and loves Charles. And more importantly, Charles doesn't love anybody else as much as he loves Meg, because their dad has been missing for a long time. So their dad hasn't had a chance to build a relationship with Charles. And Calvin's new. He just joined their journey, literally like 100 pages ago. So he's not that close to Charles, and Charles is not that close to him. So the only person who can call Charles out of this evil that has settled on him is Meg, because she's the only one who he really truly loves. And yet she's still afraid and she still doesn't really want to go. And I think that's so realistic because a lot of times these heroes in books are so, they're courageous and they're selfless and they're just awesome. And real human beings often are not like that. It takes a bit of a push sometimes to get people to do what they're supposed to do. And so I like that about Meg, is that she's a relatable character. She's flawed, and that's what makes her such a great main character. And then the third thing that I loved about this book is the themes of familial love. So for middle grade, I think it's really a good idea. Well, I mean, it's a good idea at any age, but particularly for middle grade, I like how they emphasize in this one family love. A lot of middle grade books, especially for girls, although this is not necessarily especially for girls, but I sense that a lot of middle-aged books, they like to do romances and fairy tale type, Disney stories, which is, I mean, that they have their place, but it's so nice to see a book that focuses on love between family members, brother, sister, father, daughter, mother, daughter, whatever. There is a slight hint of romance in here because later on, this book is the first in a series. You see Meg later on. She grows up and she's featured in some other books. She's not really the main character anymore, but she is in a few of the other books that Lee Engle writes. And she and Calvin eventually get married. Major spoiler. But in this book, they're still kids. And so that's not really the point. The point is that for her love for her brother is what saves him. Her love for her dad is what kind of gets them on this journey. His love for them is what helps him to come out of his prison. That's actually one of the lines in the book that I think Mrs. Whatsit says or something. She says something like, a man will do for his kids what he's not willing to do for himself. Something along those lines, which is parents, they're willing to fight harder when it's their child's safety and life and well-being on the line than they will fight for themselves. And I think that's really true. And so I love how this book focuses on happy families. Well, I mean, they're not happy in the beginning because they're separated, but when they find each other, the love that the parents have for the children have for each other, that's just, I love that. I love how that's one of the major themes in this book. Okay, let's talk about some of the things that were not so good. So we'll start from the mild to the serious. So the mild critique I have is Calvin kind of comes out of nowhere, for one. Like, who is he? Why did he just pop out and join the journey? They have no history with this guy. He just comes in and he's like, I'm going to your house now and I'm going to join the adventure now, help you save your dad. I don't even know your dad, but I'll help you save him. Which is okay, I guess. It's a kid's book, but then again, I don't know. It's okay. I don't think this is a really major thing. I just thought it was a little odd. So there's that. The second one was the happy medium scene. So there's this one part where the three children visit this planet and they meet this guy who is a happy medium. He's kind of a seer or a prophet of some sort, and he shows them a vision of the planet, of their own planet Earth, and then he also shows them Camazotz, I think, where Mr. Murray, Meg's dad, is being captured, is being held. And it's just a really weird scene. I feel like Lee Engle was trying to make a point with that scene. Something about, happy medium, in the metaphysical sense, is just having balance in your life. But in this sense, he's a literal happy medium. Like, he's happy, he's a jolly fellow, and he's a medium. He's like a sorcerer kind of thing. The word medium can mean lots of things. In this sense, it means somebody who does magic. And personally, I'm not super fond of the word, but I don't know. I just find that whole scene confusing. I feel like Lee Engle was trying to make a point, but I don't know what the point was. So, anyways. All right, the third one is the list of fighters. For this, this was the part of the book that I really disliked the most. It was major red flag for me. Because there's this one part where Mrs. Whatsit shows Meg and Calvin and Charles that their planet, Earth, is partially covered by the dark thing that is completely covering Camazotz. In other words, she's saying that, there's an evil creeping over the world, and yet, there are people fighting against it. And then so she says, you guys know some of the people who are fighting against the darkness. Would you like to give some examples? And then Meg and Charles Wallace and Calvin, mostly Calvin and Charles, come up with a list of people. And they're like, Jesus and Madame Curie and Newton. I don't remember all of the names, but some of the names they mentioned were Buddha and Gandhi. And I was like, I don't know. I think Lee Engle's point that she was trying to make is that people who create, discover, and encourage others fight against evil with their actions. And so she mentioned that list of names, but I don't recall exactly. I think I did a little bit of research once into Lee Engel's background. I think she was some kind of, not really a Christian, but some kind of like spin-off of Christianity, which kind of makes sense because she's like putting Jesus in the same category as Buddha and not to mention Madame Curie and Gandhi. It's like, the syncretism is so off for me. To be honest, first of all, Buddha is, as far as I know, he was an actual person named Siddhartha Gautama or something like that. But Buddha is not really a person. It's supposed to be a title for somebody who has attained nirvana in the Buddhist religion, philosophy, whatever you call it. And so I would not really say that's fighting evil. That's avoiding things. That's, massive avoidance. And then Gandhi and Madame Curie. So a lot of people think that Gandhi and Madame Curie are good people, but this is one of the things that I've learned as I've grown older, is that there are no good people. And a lot of times the people that you think are the best people in the world, they are, Martin Luther King Jr. types, or Martin Luther himself even. It's like, well, Martin Luther actually had serious problem with anti-Semitism. Martin Luther King was an adulterer, and also he didn't really preach the gospel, apparently. I have to look it up, but I heard there's like this documentary out called Uncle Tom 2 or something like that, and I think they mentioned something about Martin Luther King Jr. not being exactly the role model that you think he was. Same thing with Madame Curie. She had an affair after her husband died with the married husband of another scientist. Or actually, I think Paul Angevin, I think was his name. He was a scientist. I don't know if his wife was, but she had an affair with him, even while he was married to his wife. So, not exactly fighting evil that way. Not to say that, that I'm better than these people or that they're worse than other people. I'm just saying that human beings in general are very flawed. But I suppose you could make the point that, that even though they did some evil things in their lives, they also did some good things in their lives. I just find it very, what's the word? Gauche? Or just not good. Not good that she put Jesus in the same category as these people, because Jesus is not really a person, let's say. Or I shouldn't say he's not a person. He was a person. But he was not a flawed person in the same way that these people were flawed people. So, there's that. I mean, with Madame Curie, with Gandhi, with a lot of these other people, we know for sure that they have done very, very evil things in their lives. And, like I said, I'm not trying to say that they're evil people in total. I'm just saying that human beings, we have to have a humble view of ourselves, because we are all capable of doing really horrible things. And so yes, we can fight against the evil. We can, try to, exercise our good, choose our good sides more than we choose our bad sides. But we have to also be aware that we're not perfect, and nobody is perfect, and you don't want to hero worship anybody too much, because it's dangerous. They're going to disappoint you. Anyways, long rant. That was the part of Wrinkle in Time that I really didn't like the most. So going from least to most serious, that would be my 3. All right, let's talk about some borrowable ideas, things that we can learn from the book and apply to our own writing. The first one is include an overused stereotype. So just like Lee Engel started with, it was a dark and stormy night, and she ended up writing a story that was really not stereotypical and cliched, even though she used a stereotypical and cliched first line. I thought that contrast was fun. So see if you can find some cliches, whether they're tropes or lines or character types or whatever. Put that in the story and see if you can just make that one thing cliched, but everything else is so different that the story is really fun. The second one, write a love story that is not a romance. I think this is a really good challenge because there are so many romances out there. Not that that's bad, it's just that it's so pervasive, it's so ubiquitous. All of the songs, all of the stories, all of the movies, if they're not romantic, like featuring romances, they have a romance on the side. And it gets a little, not tiresome, but I think it would be an interesting challenge to write a love story that is not a romance. So love between parents and children, between children and children, siblings, friends, whatever. It's kind of like the same thing with mysteries, for example. The vast majority of mystery books, novels, TV shows, etc., they always feature a murder. And that's one of the reasons why I love Sherlock Holmes, is that it's not always murder. In fact, most of the time it's not a murder that he's trying to solve. It's like hidden identities or lost jewels or whatever. I just thought that's a lot more clever. It takes more thought to write a mystery that's not a murder, and it takes more thought to write a love story that's not a romance. So that's a good challenge to do. Another one is make a character seriously flawed but also relatable. So going back to talking about Meg, she's flawed not just in the sense that, oh, she has a few quirks and stuff. She actually has a moral failing. There's the part where she's the only one who can go back and save Charles. I mean, they don't really say that to her in so many words, but she realizes it herself. It takes her a while, but she finally gets there. She doesn't want to go back. It's her own baby brother, and she doesn't want to go and save him because she's too afraid of this evil it thing. And that is so realistic, because human beings, we're not just flawed in the sense that, oh, I chew my nails sometimes, or I speak in a high-pitched voice, which is kind of annoying. Those are minor flaws. I'm talking major moral flaws, like your brother is in the grip of an evil thing, and you are not running to try to save him. You'd rather send your dad instead, you've just saved your dad from this evil thing. You want to send him back to the evil thing to save your brother instead of you. That is a pretty selfish thing to do, right? But the thing is, human beings are selfish. We can be anyways. And so that's the reason why Meg is such a great character. She's relatable. She's flawed. Not just a little bit like surface shallow flawed, but deeply flawed. And yet, she in the end makes the right choice, and she does the right thing, and she becomes a hero in spite of her deep flaws. And I think that's really encouraging for human beings today, because we are all flawed like that, We all have the capacity, and we have done things that are deeply morally dark, not just surface shallow issues, but really major problems. And that's the reason why I really liked this book, is that it doesn't shy away from some of these deeper philosophical themes that I think are applicable not just to children but to adults as well. So anyways, that is the book chat for Wrinkle in Time. Those are my thoughts. Would love to know yours. Feel free to share. As always, if you haven't joined our merry band, feel free to do so at bebrilliantwriter.com. And until our next book chat, spread light.